Okay, y'all, here comes another live podcast, two-parter this time. Communications Director Chris Mosier here. Progress Texas was super proud to join our allies at Environment Texas recently for a terrific discussion on clean energy and its intersection with the beautiful, varied, and treasured ecologies of the Lone Star State at the wonderful Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in South Austin. In this first of two parts, we have a welcome statement from Andy Sansom, former Executive Director of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, an update on the current state of clean energy in Texas from Dr. Michael Weber, professor and expert in the field at UT Austin, and a panel discussion on the alignment of conservation and energy goals in Texas with Conservation Director of the Sierra Club's Lone Star Chapter, Cyrus Reed, Vice President of the Advanced Power Alliance, Judd, Executive Director of the Texas Solar and Storage Association, Mark Stover, and Audubon, Texas Vice President and Executive Director, Lisa Gonzalez. And stay tuned for part two of the event that'll be coming your way on Wednesday. Enjoy.
Hello, good morning. We're going to get started in just a minute if everyone wants to get to your seats. My name is Luke Metzger. I'm the Executive Director of Environment Texas. Thank you so much for coming out today for the Nature and Clean Energy Summit on such a beautiful day. Hopefully everyone gets a chance to go check out the Wildflower Center while you're here, perhaps this afternoon. I wanted to thank many of the people for helping make this summit possible, including National Wildlife Federation and Advanced Power Alliance for helping provide financial support to this event, as well as the Sierra Club Lone Star Chapter, Texas Audubon, Yes to Best, Greenlight America, and Solar Austin for helping plan and promote the event. Thanks to Progress Texas for recording the event. And thanks to Ford and and his team of interns for putting this whole event together. This is actually the fifth event in a road show that we've been doing. And so Ford and his team have been down to Brownsville, Corpus, Houston, Beaumont, and now this is the kind of culminating event to really help examine this issue of how do we balance the urgent need to develop clean energy in Texas with helping make sure that we're mitigating impacts to land and wildlife. I wanted to talk a little bit about the agenda today first. We will have Dr. Michael Weber, who's an energy expert and professor at UT. He's on his way, so hopefully timing will work out perfectly. And then following that, we'll have a panel discussion with a group to look at just some of the policy questions around balancing, nature and clean energy. Then we're going to have a legislative perspective from Representative Aaron Zwiener. Then we're going to have a panel looking at just some of the best practices that are being used already by industry to help mitigate impacts. And then we'll have lunch, and we're hoping to have a discussion during lunch at each table where we all can just talk about what we learned today from all the panels and the presentations, and hear your concerns, hear your ideas on how do we really thread that needle of advancing clean energy, but also making sure that we're protecting the beauty of Texas. And then we'll wrap up around 2:00. And like I said, I encourage everyone to get outside. It's going to be a gorgeous day, and maybe there'll be a group of folks that just go and explore the Wildflower Center, so hopefully that'll happen organically. So I'm at Environment Texas. Our mission is to protect the natural world, and that includes preserving many of the things that make Texas so great: our prairies, our forests, the Gulf, and all the critters that we share the state with, the birds and the whales and the ocelots and the many other beautiful species that help make life so rich here in Texas. And we know that we work to protect those places. We also know that it's critical that we maintain clean air and clean water, both for our own health, but also for the animals, as well as a livable climate. And right now in Texas, we're continue to grow rapidly, and that includes in development of energy. I think there's a legitimate debate about how much energy we really need or really can afford. But certainly any energy that we are producing, we need to produce as cleanly as possible without the pollution. And we know that wind and solar energy are, the cleanest forms of energy that are helping reduce the air pollution that, linked to thousands of deaths, every year in the state, that are helping avoid huge amounts of water consumption that often conventional generation relies on to cool power plants, and avoiding the warming gases that are causing such harm to our climate. And so we need more clean energy, and fortunately Texas is leading in the development of wind, solar, batteries. And at the same time, we recognize that there are impacts from that development. That we are there is a footprint, from wind farms, solar farms. There are impacts, and there's a right way and there's a wrong way to build some of these wind farms and solar farms. And so we need to make sure that we're balancing those needs deliberately and carefully, having a clear roadmap to renewable energy developers about how to use those best practices, and requiring some of those best practices to make sure that we are helping keep what makes Texas great great. And so that's the point of this discussion today, is to talk about how do we balance those needs. Unfortunately, we are seeing a tax on renewable energy, including bills in the legislature that would effectively ban forms of renewable energy, or other kind of measures that are so punitive that would effectively ban renewable energy. And that's not the answer. We need clean energy, but we need to do it right. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And to kick us off, we have a special guest. I thought no better person to help start off this discussion, but one of Texas's leading conservationists, Andy Sansom, who is both the former executive director of Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, where he helped protect some of the great places in Texas like Big Bend Ranch and Enchanted Rock and other places, a former executive director of the Texas Nature Conservancy, the founder of the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University, and avid fly fisher. And so let's please welcome one of my heroes, Andy Sansom.
Thank you, Luke. Luke has just demonstrated to you that he has the primary skill of the politician. In that introduction, he was able to make things sound better than they actually are, which always reminds me of a man that was trying to get insurance for his family, and he got to the place on the forms where he had to say what had happened to his parents. Well, his father had been hanged. So he took a deep breath, and in order to make things sound better than they actually were, he wrote on the form that his father had died at the age of 65 while participating in a public ceremony when the platform collapsed. It's an incredible honor for me to be here with Luke. I know that each of you know that he led efforts to accomplish an almost unbelievable challenge, which was to get the legislature to put $1 billion on the ballot for state park purchases. And that would not have happened without that. I am so glad to see so many old friends here today, but even more to see so many young people now getting involved in the environment. And no issue could be more timely than the relationship of energy and the environment. And I think one of the most important things we've got to continue to remind ourselves to do is that energy, water, and land conservation are all a part of the same issue. They're intertwined, and we're not going to be able to address them unless we continue to keep that interconnection in mind. In addition to that, we may have an opportunity given some of the bad news that's around. First of all, the drought. We used to say that the drought of the 50s was the worst that it's ever going to get, but I think people are beginning to question that. Secondly, because of the incredible efforts to put data centers across the state, there may be as many, I've seen estimates of many as 391 already here. And so between that and the efforts to withdraw huge amounts of groundwater, we've got our hands full. But in all the years that I've worked in this space and in this movement, the legislature doesn't do anything that's hard unless there's a real crisis. And we have a emerging crisis on our hands. The groundwater in Texas has never been under more stress than it is right now, both for population growth, for data centers, and for energy production. And we have a really inadequate system of managing it. We manage groundwater through these little conservation districts across the state, which don't have the money to do the proper science to even determine how much water they're responsible for in the ground. And secondly, they're terrified of litigation. They do not have the funding to support defending themselves on lawsuits. And we still pretend that groundwater and surface water are completely different substances. Think of the Blanco. The Blanco starts out in Kendall County and it flows southeastward toward Hays County. And before it gets to Hays County, it goes back in the ground. It comes back up at a place where I know all of you are familiar with, Jacob's Well, flows down Cypress Creek through Wimberley and back in the Blanco. If you tried to get a water rights permit to take any water out of the Blanco, you wouldn't get it because it's already overcommitted. But if you want to go up above Jacob's Well and drill a hole in the ground, you can take just about as you're man and woman enough to pump with hardly any regulation, and it's the same water. So I don't think we're going to be able, you're going to see a lot of discussion of this leading up to the next legislative session, and it's way overdue and very welcome. I don't think we're going to ever get to the point, at least anytime soon, where we eliminate the rule of capture, but I hear more and more talk of using a system like we do for oil and gas of correlative rights so that we can take care of our own needs, but when we start damaging our neighbor in terms of his or her water, we got a problem. And I think that is beginning to be recognized. Insofar as the landscape is concerned, Texas is 95% privately owned. And forgive me, Luke, $1 billion is not enough to solve the land conservation problems that we face. The biggest single terrestrial issue that we're facing is the continued breakup of family land. We lose rural and agricultural land faster than any other state. And we've got to find a way to keep landowners on ancestral properties and being good stewards of it. Otherwise, we're not going to recharge our aquifers or save our watersheds, provide wildlife habitat for all the species that are important to us. One of the things that concerns me the most as we move into this increasing demand for energy is eminent domain. We've protected hundreds of thousands of acres of private lands in Texas with conservation easements. And I know that many in this room have been involved in that, but let me tell you, and I hate to do it, these easement protected properties are targets for eminent domain. And the reason is there's no development and there's not a lot of subdivision. And so they deal with less landowners and no adverse development. And we've got to find a way, if you've been in an eminent domain proceeding before the Public Utility Commission, they have to consider environmental issues in granting eminent domain authority. But so far, protected lands under conservation easements are not one of the things that they need to consider. And at the very minimum, we need to understand that crossing property that's protected defeats the purpose for which the landowner agreed in the first place to the conservation easement. Superimposed over all of this is a growing understanding that our climate is clearly changing. And so we're going to have more problems than I can almost imagine going forward, but we need to seize those as opportunities to get the attention of policymakers. And as Luke said, no form of energy does not have environmental impact. All forms of energy affect the environment in one way or another. And I want to tell you, I'm all over clean energy and shifting as much as we can away from fossil fuels. But we've got to understand that it all has impact that we need to be conscious of. We need to collaborate. Wind farms across the United States kill hundreds of thousands of birds and bats every year. But the wind energy industry has been investing in trying to make sure that that impact is minimized. So working with oftentimes strange bedfellows is an important part of what we need to do. Most importantly, and once again, I look out and see all of the young faces in the audience. No matter what we do, whether we're school teachers or accountants or attorneys, whatever it is that we do in our lives, each one of us can find a way to help a young person get an internship in a conservation organization, or take a child and put them in the water, teach them how to fish, take them hunting or hiking or bird watching. And to understand that the outdoors is a source of fun, that it's a source of mental health, spiritual renewal, but it's not going to be there unless they take responsibility for it. And every single one of these issues is multi-generational in impact. And so we need to do everything we can to have children understand that it's important to them and their grandchildren. So thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you, Andy. Next, I'd like to introduce, I think, one of the most brilliant minds on energy and climate in Texas, Dr. Michael Weber, who's the Sid Richardson Chair at the LBJ School of Public Affairs and the Cockrell Family Chair in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. In addition to his roles as a faculty member from August 2021 to September 2024, Dr. Weber served as the Chief Technology Officer of Energy Impact Partners, a $5 billion venture fund focused on investments in clean tech and climate tech startups with the potential for decarbonization at speed and scale. Furthermore, from 2018 to 2021, Weber was based in Paris, France, where he served as the Chief Science and Technology Officer at Engie, is that how you pronounce it? And one of the world's largest energy companies. So let's welcome Dr. Weber.
Good morning, good to see you. It's good to be here. So one thing you didn't say is I'm an Austin native, which is probably the most important part of my bio, I think. So I'm a local, and I grew up at Brandy, of all things. We're on the Rollingwood swim team together. So, true story, I would just say, I think. So yeah, there aren't that many locals, it seems like, but it's good to have been in Austin. And I'm back in my childhood home. So I live in my childhood home, which is kind of a funny compare and contrast because I lived there in the 70s and the 80s and moved away and came back in the 2000s, 20 years ago, and seen how much the area has changed and how much Austin's changed, but the environmental sort of emphasis has not changed, which is good because we need it more than ever. I think that Texas perspective gives me a particular view, which is different than many places in the world. And I lived in France for a while, as you heard, and I've been a venture capitalist. I've done a variety of things that all informs my viewpoint. And I think I want to give mostly good news story. There's like a lot of bad news out there, right? And I can go dark. If you want, we could talk about what's going on in the world, but let me give you some good news. And then we'll kind of go into Q&A and whatever you want to talk about. And I tend to be an optimist, so you should like discount what I'm saying appropriately. But I'm an optimist and a techno-optimist and all this. But I feel like I look at the world around us. The world is going through an energy transition right now. And by the way, transition's a trigger word for a lot of audiences. So you have to be careful about how you use it, but we're in energy transition. I've actually got a running list of words I can't say anymore. We used to say energy revolution. You can't say that. You can't say energy evolution, energy transition. You can't say, but you can say energy innovation, energy expansion, energy abundance, energy dominance. There are a few things that are approved now. Energy transition is not on the approved list, which is kind of funny and horrifying all at the same time. But I think we're in a transition. Transition means like an era of change, but really the energy system has always been changing. The one constant in energy is that energy changes. It's just that there are some eras of a decade or two where the change is more accelerated. We're in one of those eras now. We've had other eras of rapid accelerated change before. And we tend to give those eras a name, like the Industrial Revolution or the Second Industrial Revolution or the era of rural electrification. Like we've had episodes where we do a lot with energy quickly and then it kind of stabilizes for 30, 50 years, and then we do another rapid change. We're in one of those rapid changes right now. And I think the energy transition we're going through right now has three parts. One is expanding energy access. That's especially true globally. We already have universal access in the United States, although what kind of energy we're increasing access to is changing, which is kind of interesting. But increase energy access, decarbonize or clean up. So for the energy we have, we need to clean up how we provide it. And the third is operating in a warmer world. So Andy just said this, like their climate's changing, we're going to a warmer world. The warmer world has all sorts of operational challenges, both in terms of drought and flood and heat wave and windstorms and tornadoes, but also freezes, which is kind of weird. That's not obvious that a warming world would give you more freezes, but it gives us a more mild winter on average, but a deeper deep freeze more often, which is bizarre. So it's hard to plan for. But that's what's going on right now, this energy transition, going to expanded energy access, decarbonized system, and operating in a warmer world. And that has a lot of challenges, but it's also kind of exciting because there are elements of that that we've been calling for, we collectively, environmental community or environmentalists, since the 70s or 80s, and it's picked up pace in a way that is very non-obvious. So let me tell you some of the successes over the last 20 or 25 years. I really would say I started as an energy guy kind of around 2005. I declared to the world, I'm an energy guy, and the world believed me. I'm like, oh crap, I better go learn energy. So I'm an energy guy, and my first study was actually for the Pentagon. I was at the RAND Corporation, a think tank, and I delivered the study 20 years ago, almost to the day. So in 2006, I delivered the study to the Pentagon on energy and national security, where we said there are a couple of risks to the US energy system. One is Vladimir Putin. We named him by name because he was in power then. We'll use energy exports to extract foreign policy concessions from Europe. Iran will use its energy exports to make money to threaten its neighbors. And the two biggest single point failure risks we have to manage are attacks on major energy infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, like refineries or other things like that in the Persian Gulf, and closure of the Strait of Hormuz. We wrote this down, we said this 20 years ago, and here we are reading the headlines line by line. It's everything we anticipated. But what's interesting to me, whether that's horrible, and I'm happy to talk more about what that means for the global system, but it's interesting is how much has changed in the 20 years since we did that. We did not foresee the rise of shale oil and gas, which I recognize has its downsides, but has been pretty interesting from the American perspective, or the rise of wind and solar. And so there's been this incredible story in the last 20 years where our security is much better today in the United States than it was 20 years ago, but so is our economy-wide efficiency and our economy-wide emissions. I wrote that report in 2006. That was the year US coal consumption peaked. That was the year US CO2 emissions peaked. For 20 years, our coal use has dropped 60% and our CO2 emissions have dropped 20%, and we didn't even try. That's fascinating, because I've lived in France and other places where they said we must decarbonize and then they don't. And we say we don't care and then we do, right? That's at least ironic, right? If not like outright funny. And we got there primarily because of the unsung hero of efficiency and conservation. So as a nation, we consume about the same energy today or a little bit less as we did 20 or 25 years ago, despite the population growing 20%, despite the economy doubling or tripling, depending on how you measure. We've doubled the economy and grown the population 20%, and we use the same amount of energy or less. That is wild, and that is great news. And conservation and efficiency are not like sexy policy platforms for politicians. They're hard to legislate. They're hard for markets to deal with. We can get there through fuel economy standards and appliance standards and building code. There are a lot of things we can do in this, but it's not something that people talk about. And I think it was Dick Cheney said that like it's a good social virtue, but it's not really a policy thing. And that was kind of offensive, but I kind of understand what he's saying, that like it's not a policy people want to run on, but it's been incredibly effective. Our efficiency and conservation in the United States has done something that no other country's done for the most part. Most countries say they'll tackle climate change and don't. The only country that has tackled climate change on purpose and reduced emissions, I think, is the UK. Like if maybe like Singapore, a few other ones. But the UK said they will and they did. Everyone else say they will and they don't. And then we're like, maybe we'll get to it someday, and then we did it. Or at least we started it, we're not done. And so for us to go from 6 billion tons of CO2 emissions a year in 2006 to under 5 billion tons a year without even trying is really interesting. That doesn't mean you weren't trying, but and I know there's a lot of people trying. But the way we got there was from natural gas combined cycle power plants and wind and solar displacing coal. It was also from efficiency in all our different systems. It's changing cultural work patterns. Just like, but this is for me very exciting. Like, wow! Just imagine if we tried beyond the local level, but at the federal level, can we do this? What's the next billion tons? What's the next 2 billion tons? Can we get there? And so there's good news when it comes to energy. There's good news when it comes to energy efficiency. There's good news when it comes to energy security in the United States. There's good news when it comes to CO2 emissions. And then there's also all this bad news. You already heard about it, right? So we have a federal administration that's very anti most things that you might care about when it comes to the environment. In my view, President Trump won't stop any of this, but he will make it more expensive. Which I think we're still going to build wind and solar because wind and solar are still cheaper and better and quicker, right? We're going to have to do it. Now, new offshore wind might be on a hiatus for a couple of years, so that's one that he can really try to kill. I mean, he's tried to kill, and he will put it on pause for a while. But I think that onshore wind and solar will have struggles, but will get built because we have an affordability crisis, we have we have all these reasons we need to build power as quickly as possible. And you can say you love natural gas, that doesn't mean you're getting a turbine before 2032. And you can say you love natural gas, and that doesn't mean you'll get your pipe to your power plant anytime soon either. So there are real logistical challenges for natural gas or whatever your preferred alternative to wind and solar is. And so I think we're gonna build a lot of wind and solar, it's just gonna be pricier, but we still need it. And I think a lot of the gas that we build in a hurry for data centers with these reciprocating engines, which are really noisy and not as clean, they'll be built and they'll be used, but in about 5 years, they won't be used so much because they'll be so much more expensive than the wind and solar and everything else we can get. So it's not unusual for people to build these engine systems with gas and to quit using them the minute they don't have to because they're just so expensive. So this thing about gas engines and gas turbines are expensive to build and then expensive to operate, which is kind of fascinating. We don't usually want to do that. And so even for the stuff that's really nerve-wracking around data centers and gas engine turbines, I'm not that worried. I'd be amazed if data centers get built and they build natural gas power plants on site and they run them for 20 years. I bet it's like 3 to 5 years. I might be wrong, but I'm like, we have a lot of power plants we built in America that we don't run that much because they're just so much more expensive than wind and solar or conservation efficiency. So I think there's actually weirdly some good news despite all the bad news. And then maybe I'll just take a step in the direction of the bad news, but in the end, it's like good news if you care about clean energy, at least. It's bad for the world, but good for clean energy, at least in Texas, which is the price spikes we are about to endure that have already started. Like what's oil up, 40% or something like that? Natural gas is twice higher now than it was 18 months ago or something like that. So natural gas and oil and derivative products are all more expensive. I haven't watched the news. I actually gave an energy and national security speech just before this, so I was running late to get here. I believe as I was speaking, did we start attacking Karg Island? Does everyone know? I think we started a major attack in Iran, which there were already problems before this, but a major attack is underway as I speak. So oil prices presumably will go up $10 a barrel, not because of me, but while I'm speaking. This is bad for humanity. I think, so if I could be really dour, I think millions of people are gonna die from food insecurity. I think this is a huge problem. I think we should care, and I think we should not celebrate the suffering that is underway or about to be underway. But if you care about clean energy, the price spikes for gas and oil will be the equivalent of like a $200 per ton carbon tax or something. We're going to accelerate towards other options, whether you care about the cleanliness or not. I think we all care about the cleanliness, but because you will not be able to afford the other options. So this has a bizarre circumstance of accelerating our move towards options that are local, domestic, secure, and clean, because we cannot get the other things or they're just so unaffordable, which we were already doing anyway. Like we spent 20 years going to cleaner stuff because it's cleaner and cheaper and reliable and local and all this kind of stuff. We're just gonna accelerate it. And so there's always a silver lining, or I call this as a green lining in this one, I guess. And it's gonna be a bizarre, because I don't know if you ever get survivor's guilt. We'll be fine in Texas. We'll be fine, people will suffer elsewhere. But in Texas, we have these options. We'll be able to have some other things. And so we're gonna look back in 20 years, not fondly on the Trump administration, but we'll say, actually the energy transition accelerated by the time he was done. And that's a weird thought, but I suspect that's what's gonna happen, because everything else will just be so much more expensive. And everything he's doing around tariffs and labor policy, all of it makes everything more expensive. When everything's more expensive, what do? You go to the cheap stuff. What's the cheap stuff? The clean stuff. We're at a point, and we wouldn't have said that 15 years ago. 15 years ago, the clean stuff looked more expensive, but today the clean stuff's cheaper. Yeah, any way you measure. Even if you worry about variability and all that, you just build batteries, other things, like it's still gonna be cheaper. So even when horrible things are going on, I think the movement towards cleaner things that many of you originated and some of you are propagating will continue. How's that for a weirdly optimistic kind of speech? But and maybe it's just like, it's weird to be Texas because we say we don't care, but then we do it anyway, right? But I think there's something happening, and I'm happy to talk more about Iran or whatever you want. Maybe I'll stop there so we have time for questions, but I just can't thank you enough for everything all of you do at an individual level to make the world a better place, and I think it's gonna happen. I think it's happening. I think it will continue to happen. I think it must continue to happen. And I think that actually the momentum will build despite the federal headwinds. The federal headwinds are real. There's a real problem. There's dozens of wind farms having trouble getting the permits. Like, this is real stuff, and there's real money at stake. But in the end, they will proceed. So maybe I'll stop there. But we have time for Q&A, maybe a little bit? Okay, 15 minutes. So I'll take questions, corrections, and insults. So I'll take all of it. Do you want me just to call on people? Or? I'll start with Brandy. So, yeah.
I heard from one of our audience people this morning that one of the AI centers is going to use more energy than all the homes in Texas currently combined, which blows my mind. Do you see anybody doing something like an X Prize or some sort of challenge to get data centers to figure out how to be the equivalent of like a living building challenge, or something like they're able to produce as much water and energy as they need, like without polluting the world?
That's a good question around data center. I doubt. Repeat the question. Yeah. So the question is, there might be a data center that one data center complex might use more energy than all the households in Texas combined. And then what about some challenges, an X Prize or something equivalent to get people, meaning data center developers, to a better set of options? I'd be amazed if data centers use more than every household in Texas. Maybe combined all data centers would be. We have like 10 million households in Texas, say 5 kilowatts a house. So that's like 50 gigs of demand. Maybe if we build all the data centers that are promised, we'll have 50 gigawatts from data centers to match the homes. That's in terms of peak demand. In terms of round the clock consumption, it'll probably be higher because our households go up and down with the weather, but data centers run around the clock. We don't know how many data centers will be built in Texas. It's anywhere from 20 to 200 gigawatts. I bet it's more like 20 to 50 gigawatts. I can't imagine we're gonna build hundreds of gigawatts of data centers. There aren't hundreds of gigawatts of chips available for sale, so I don't think that will happen. You can imagine maybe 100 gigawatts of data centers around the world, of which half will be in the United States, of which a substantial fraction will be in Texas. I guess we'll end up at 20. Who knows? We'll see. It's easy in Texas to do stuff at a bigger scale than we do in other places, so it might be more. 20 gigawatts is still a lot. And it could be a lot at one location. If we look at Stargate and Abilene, they've announced 5 gigawatts at one location. 5 gigawatts is a lot. Austin's peak demand is 3 gigawatts. So this is like 1.6 of Austin in a town that's a 10th the size or 20th the size. It's like taking the city of Austin and putting it at the end of the block. That's a lot of power consumption in one place. It's a lot of land disturbance, a lot of water use all in one spot. So it's the density of the need that I think is really alarming, because when that turns on, it can destabilize the grid. And when it turns off, it can destabilize the grid. So we just have to worry about how much power is at that location. They've also already said they're gonna scale back and not build all of it. So I think there's a lot of bluffing and overclaiming and all this kind of stuff. But still, if we build 20 gigawatts, that's a lot. I don't think we'll build it all in one spot. But the question really is, can we do better than what we're doing now? And the answer is yes. I actually was just reading a paper last night, came out in 2025, about water positive and carbon negative data centers. So how can you be water positive? I think Meta announced a water positive one in El Paso. It's not really water positive, it's using water. But they promise to do closed loop cooling, like you add the water once and then you don't need to add much makeup water if you keep the water in the system and don't lose too much. And then you have air cooling for the external environment, which is noisy, but it's at least not as water intensive. And then invest in water resources or conservation or wetlands. You don't have wetlands in El Paso, whatever you would invest in El Paso. But do investments outside the data center to increase water availability and water quality that way. That might be what we see. It's gonna be hard to make your actual data center water positive, but the data center companies are rich. And if they can apply their money to water resources some other way, in a neighboring way with a swap, I'm okay with that. I'm not sure everyone's okay with that, but that would be pretty interesting to get some investments that way. So maybe we can get it to be water positive if the money comes to the data center, invest in water efficiency there and water productivity or resources elsewhere. The carbon negativity is interesting because there's so much waste heat. Basically, electricity comes in and it leaves us photons and heat. And the photons are not impactful, but the heat can be. And you can actually get heat island effects from the data centers. But they have so much waste heat. You could use the waste heat to do water treatment. You can use the waste heat with absorption chillers or absorption capture systems to capture CO2. And there's so much waste heat, you can make these carbon negative. And that's kind of interesting. Now, they won't do that just because they have to have a buyer or someone for the carbon. But if we had market systems for carbon or policies or regulations that said you can't pollute too much carbon, then they could use the waste heat to be carbon negative. And so I think at least abstractly or theoretically, you could be water positive and carbon negative. Well, let's do that rather than just the opposite. And when I talk to Meta and Microsoft and NVIDIA, and I talk to Google, I don't talk to Amazon, I don't know Amazon, I know the others, they're all worried. And they're like, we all made zero carbon promises and now we're buying gas and we know it. We would like to buy nuclear, geothermal, wind, and solar, but we just can't get enough of it quickly enough. We'll build gas and we'll shut it down in 5 years. No one believes them, except, like, I believe them actually, because who wants to run a gas turbine 5 years from now if you have something else? But they're all worried and sensitive. It's a fair point. They should be sensitive and we should ask them questions about it. But I think getting the data centers themselves to be more efficient is key. But there's also the chip itself needs to be efficient, and the algorithms you need algorithmic efficiency, chip efficiency, and cooling efficiency, plus all these other things. Should there be a prize? Probably. Is the Trump administration going to tackle this? They're dancing around it. They actually have a bunch of money for AI and a bunch of money for data centers. They can't say it's about carbon because that offends their worldview, but they can talk about national security, AI dominance, making it more resilient. So they're dancing around it weirdly. ARPA-E is, we'll see, but we should have a big prize for it, I think. Yeah, Dale.
Electric vehicles, all of a sudden.
You got your electric greater than gas shirt on, yeah.
They can't keep them in stock. The used electric vehicles are just everywhere, and $4 gas, even though it's awful for a lot of people, is really forcing people to realize the stuff. We have our statewide Texas EV Alliance that now has software that tells us where every electric vehicle in Texas and which congressional and state district these owners live in. So we're getting ready for the next session, and our hope is that we can have enough members to contact our members at all these districts that are trying to penalize zero emission vehicles.
I mean, it's nothing like high gasoline prices to inspire electric vehicle adoption. So electric vehicle adoption is increasing. I drove down here in my electric Ford Mustang. I don't want to act too smug, but my prices haven't doubled in the last month or whatever. So I think electric vehicles have always had that advantage, but gasoline prices have been relatively low for several years. And so people kind of forgot, and they felt like, oh, it needs the tax credits. So the tax credits are gone, but now we're all going to pay $500 more a year for gasoline, whoever has a gasoline car, which is the opposite of a tax credit. And so the tax credit's looking pretty good as time goes on, especially from a security perspective. So I expect electric.
Looking for the charging station at the Wildflower Center, but they haven't put it up yet.
The Wildflower, yeah. So we need charging stations here. So there is. I mean, we can make fun of state politics too, but there is state support for electric vehicle charging. We maybe need to get the grants written to get the charging network here. I'm telling you, in Texas with Buc-ee's, like I could do the Texas Triangle tour, and there's 2 Buc-ee's between here and Austin. There's 2 between Houston and Dallas, or between here and Houston, Dallas, and Dallas. Like I've got to pee more often than I need charge, and so it is. And a Dr. Pepper, or maybe some beaver nuggets and all that kind of stuff. Like it's fine in Texas for road trips. Getting to Colorado is a little tricky, but there's superchargers is at Menard and other places. So, I mean, I think electric vehicles will accelerate. The last time we had a real close example, this was 2008, when oil and gasoline prices spiked. The number one selling car in America became the Toyota Prius. It had been the Ford F-150 forever, and it was a Prius when gasoline prices were high. When gasoline prices dropped, the Ford F-150 overtook it. So we'll probably go back to something like that. Ford's interesting. I actually do research with Ford. I know them pretty well. They canceled their EV programs, but if you look at their announcements, they actually didn't. They just are doing EREVs, extended range electric vehicles, which is just a gasoline electric hybrid, kind of like the Chevy Volt from 15 years ago or something like that. So if you look at their cancellation, they're actually not canceling. They're just adding gasoline for extended range. So I expect electric vehicles to take off. I know I'm giving long-winded answers. Maybe a couple more questions. There's yes, sir, in the back. No.
Crystal ball question, and you recognize me from your team.
Yes, I see you in an ATC and all different places, yeah.
Early in my career there,
I
I was working on high-power lasers, and
was working on high-powered lasers earlier in my career. Wait a second. Yeah, it's just, we'll talk photons. Okay, yeah, exactly.
working a little more on laser fusion. I poo-pooed it. I was
It might happen in your lifetime.
It
Yeah.
may still happen now, so 15, 20 years, and you're looking at another place.
Yeah, it's a great question about is fusion going to happen?
Even with the compact magnetic or
It's a great question. Yeah, will fusion happen in your lifetime? I'm not sure how long you plan to live, but I would say that we can optimistically, for two reasons, say it will happen in your lifetime, that you'll live longer than we expect, and that fusion will happen sooner than we anticipate. So fusion's fascinating. The question really, like, is fusion going to happen? And the old joke's been fusion's 50 years away and has been for 60 years or that kind of thing. I anticipate that fusion will be a thing in the 2040s, maybe late 2030s. I think we're getting close, like it's within planning horizon. I think fusion's not close enough to change anything we're doing right now, other than maybe the R&D and some of the private investment. But there are a couple of things that have happened with fusion. I believe, if my numbers are correct, there are 44 fusion startups around the world, 26 of which are in America, and they've attracted billions of dollars of private capital, private money. So this is pretty interesting that private money is going into it. Now it tends to be billionaires and other people, right? But still, it's patient money, which is pretty interesting. There was the laser ignition facility at Sandia that had their breakthrough. Now, it really wasn't a breakthrough, but it was energy positive at the point where the laser hit for, was it 100 milliseconds or whatever it was? It was very short, and so it wasn't sustained, and it didn't include the power of the laser. So there's a lot of problems with that, but still, it was kind of interesting to get Q greater than 1 at that spot. And then there are all these new designs. There's Commonwealth Fusion System with their big magnetic stuff, their superconducting layout, and then there's Zap Energy with their Z-pinch reactor. You got to confine the plasma. So the thing about fusion is, fusion works, we know it works, that's how the sun operates. Fusion's not imaginary, it's real. The question is, can we do it on Earth in a sustained way that's cost effective? And the challenge is you have to make a plasma, which is the fourth state of matter, where the molecules or whatever are so fast that the electrons actually separate from the particles. So you need really high temperatures, 100 million degrees Celsius, whatever it is, but then you have to confine the plasma. And the sun has the temperature and the gravity of the sun confines the plasma for you. We don't have the gravity of the sun to confine the plasma, so how will you confine the plasma? You use magnets or other things. It's really, really hard. But there's so much money going into it that and so many innovations, that'd be really cool if we got it. The advantage is there's no waste, and you could turn it off in a moment's notice, so you don't get like these risk of nuclear meltdowns, things like that. So fusion's like safer and blah, blah, blah. That doesn't mean we'll be here tomorrow. We still have a power crunch right now. I will say that if I have to rank the bros in society, there's like the tech bros, and then the nuclear bros, and then the crypto bros, and then the fusion bros. So fusion bros will look you in the eye and tell you that they will deliver a power plant in 2028. And they believe it, and they mean it. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. But there's a confidence there, like, we got this. We shall see. I'm skeptical, but I would love to be wrong, because if we had fusion, that is the one thing that would like solve so many problems if we had fusion. Anyway, so I think there's a lot of innovation there. It's out of the labs now and into the private sector. We'll see. I'm kind of optimistic, but I just said 2040s, so I'm not that optimistic, I guess. Good question. Yes, sir. And I'll come over to the side in just a second. Yes.
Batteries and transmission are two of the issues that really enable the build out of additional renewable energy. What's your take on batteries and the new Texas 765 kV grid by 2030?
Great. So the question is about transmission and batteries as enabling technologies for the clean energy world, and that's true. Both are very enabling. I would say both serve different functions, but both are really valuable. Batteries are getting built very rapidly right now. In Texas, we went from 0 to like number 3 in the world for batteries installed, and we'll probably be number 2, maybe in a year or two or something. Like, it's just the number of batteries we install is so rapid because they serve so many important functions. There's ancillary services and bulk power and energy arbitrage and reliability, and you can build them quickly, and the supply chains are robust and everything like that. So batteries are really valuable. We could potentially have a megawatt battery at every feeder or node or substation in Texas, of which there are thousands, and they would all be handy. They would all make money and all this kind of stuff. So we're building batteries, and batteries are good. Transmission is also good. I'm very pro transmission. Transmission is ugly. No one wants to see it. It degrades land value with inside of it. These are problems, but it improves reliability of the systems, lower costs, and enables us to plug in a lot more wind and solar and other things. So more transmission would be very good. And I'm very supportive of transmission. Transmission's hard. Bob Hebner, a colleague of mine at UT at the Center for Electromechanics, used to say 90% of all the transmission that ever will be built has been built. because people at both ends win, people in the middle feel trampled on. And so the people selling power or using power benefit from this, but the people in the middle are like, well, I got this, but how do I benefit? Now they benefit indirectly from the lower emissions or the lower prices or better reliability, but it's a hard argument to make. And so we need to make the argument better. Usually you can make the argument better by picking your routes carefully and paying money. Usually people are like, that's really ugly. Here's a lot of money. You know, it looks pretty good to me. So we can solve that. We've solved it for other infrastructure, and I think it would be good. The 765 kilovolt lines in particular are very interesting. These are very high voltage lines, like more than twice high what we traditionally have built in Texas for long haul transmission. And we're going to build some in the West for the Permian, for oil and gas. It's CREZ, but we can't say CREZ because CREZ has the R for renewables in it. So now we say it's for oil and gas, and then people are like, sounds good. It's going to end up facilitating a lot of wind and solar. The customers might be oil and gas, but the providers are probably wind and solar. So I think that's going to help us a lot, frankly, those lines in the West. And then the lines in the East, we're doing some analysis with CenterPoint. We think spending billions on the high voltage lines in the eastern part of Texas will save billions of dollars. Like, it's just, I think it will save money, because if you have a bigger grid, you get more reliability, better utilization of your power plants, costs should come down. But it's like the price tag is like 10 billion or something. So it's a lot of money, but then you save 10 billion or more over the 20 years or 40 years of the transmission lines. So I really like the transmission lines. I think we need more of it. I think Texas is good at this. The rest of the nation is really bad at it. The rest of the nation should look more like us and do more transmission, especially if you want more wind and solar on the grid. We need more transmission. They are ugly. Yeah, here's the thing. They're just ugly. And they can spark wildfires. So if we really want to be ambitious, we should put them underground. But if you think 10 billion is a lot of money, wait till you put them underground. And then it's like 16 billion or 20 billion or 30 billion. Now, I'm okay with that. Like, I'd much rather, this is probably a very privileged thing to say, but I'd much rather pay more for a better system that will end up being cheaper. It will be cheaper because if you avoid one wildfire, it pays for itself. And then it's not as ugly, it doesn't degrade the land values, property taxes stay higher, you have fewer bird impact, like just all sorts of things you get from undergrounding. Like, no one agrees with me that in the world, right? I'm like, hey, let's triple the price, but I get a system that's 5 times better. Like, that's a deal I like. But it's pricey, and then you can have rate shock and all sorts of things. But I'm very pro-transmission. The thing is, no matter how much transmission you build, it's not going to be enough. That's why we need these distributed rooftop solar and batteries and everything else. Like, you can't transmission your way out of this problem. So I think we're going to have all of it. And frankly, they're not in competition. They're very complementary, I would say. Yeah, question over here. Yes, sir.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Positive,
Yeah, my overly optimistic. Yeah.
well, no, realistically optimistic.
Okay, good.
But you just set my question by talking about the ugliness and cost of all the big transmission projects. And you just touched on, if you add more, my question is about the distributed stuff. It's faster, easier, cheaper for everybody to do, as opposed to all the issues being the big grid issues, which is what makes the news. But we can have such incredible impact, right? If we just focus more, get more attention on and more engagement on all the distributed sites that are just sitting here waiting for us to relieve the grid for the data centers, et cetera. So I'd love to hear your comment.
Yeah, the question is like big grid versus local, smaller, distributed. I mean, I think these are not in conflict. We need both. And if we go back in time to the late 1800s, it was all distributed solutions. And then we consolidated to big grid solutions primarily for cost of access reasons. By sharing the assets, we could lower the cost. But then we introduced other problems with emissions, environmental impact, and communities and other things. And so we need to go back to adding more distributed, but we won't go back to 100% distributed. We went from 100% to close to zero. We'll go back up. How high will we go? Optimally, it will always be under 50% distributed. I guess we'll be in the high single digits or low, like tens of percent, something like that, because it's faster and cheaper and reliable. There are a lot of reasons why distributed makes a lot of sense, especially for household and some commercial loads. For the large industrial pockets, it's harder to do. But we can do both. I mean, I just feel like, but I'm an engineer, I'm like, oh, more tools in the toolbox is good. Trying to solve everything with 2 tools is not good. You need a range of tools. And the distributed solutions, they have different capabilities and therefore should be deployed as well. And we have some price issues where like our rooftop solar is just too expensive in Texas compared to Germany and other places. Like, these are solvable problems. We probably should solve that. And there's weird HOA regulations, I think, there are a lot of barriers we need to solve because it's good. And there are people who want it but get priced out, or there's financing problems or blah, blah, blah. So I'd like to see more of that because I think that will help. And then it will help solve these other problems like Gail's talking about with gas. Like if you have a better distributed solution at home, then you can avoid your gasoline. There are a lot of things you get that are non-obvious that will start to ripple and accumulate. Be great. I'm looking at you. Have we?
Maybe one more?
One more. Okay. Yes, sir. Right here.
So going back to the data center conversation about kind of closed grid or closed loop net zero for water and energy, how would you think, and great that we're heading towards that closed loop system, how do you think data center operators, your Googles, your Metas, are balancing the need to be more water efficient and energy efficient? Because there's a payoff. You can be more energy efficient, but you consume more water. Some of these hyperscalers are looking at using upwards of 5 million gallons a day to operate. So just want to hear your thoughts on how they're balancing that.
Great question on the tension between energy efficiency and water efficiency, and that's true for data centers and everywhere. If you want to improve energy efficiency, go to water cooling. But then if you want to reduce your water use, you go to air cooling, which is less efficient. And this is the trade-off. And there are other solutions. I got a meeting today with a grad student at UT who wants to do a geothermal cooling loop. So maybe we could do geothermal or passive cooling. You can think about the thermal massing of your building to store heat or cooling a little bit differently. You can think about white roofs. There's a lot of things you can do. But it is a tension that's always happening. And right now, most data center companies feel like they're in more of a power scarcity moment than a water scarcity moment. And therefore, they're going to prioritize more power more quickly. And efficiency in water cooling is a way to get more efficiency. The chips themselves are pretty interesting. So if we take a computer rack, maybe the size of this lectern, but my height, historically, like 3 years ago, that was 15 kilowatts, which is like one block of houses, maybe not even a full block. So several houses in one computer rack. Last year, they were up to like 150 kilowatts, like 10 times bigger. This year, it's like 200 to 400 kilowatts. Next year, it'll be a megawatt. 1 megawatt for one rack. That's one Walmart or one HEB in Texas parlance. So we have one HEB per rack, hundreds of racks. And there's the power density so high, you cannot air cool the chips. It has to be water cooled at the chip. And so you have a water loop going through because you can't shed enough heat from the chip with air alone. So you have to have a water loop, but that could be a closed loop, and then you have air cooling to cool the water loop. So you have a water cooling loop inside the facility and air cooling loop outside. Air cooling is less efficient. It's also noisier because you have the fans and everything else, and so the noise pollution is not great. So these are the tensions you have to solve. So it might vary from community to community because if you have more or less water or more or fewer people who are concerned about the noise or whatever, you'll come to a different solution. But I think we need more of that.
We work to solve is and provide. You're talking about the water purchases. They're called volumetric water benefits outside of the location, outside of the fence, but then on site you need water efficiency solutions. Yeah,
you got to start with water. Always start with efficiency and conservation, right? And then if you can't get there with efficiency and conservation, then you do some outside the fence things. And I'm okay with that, but not everybody is. So it's great. Thank you. I appreciate your time and everything.
All right, now we've got our first panel of the day. I'm going to introduce our moderator, my good friend, a cheerful warrior, a man of song, a top lobbyist at the Capitol, the conservation director of the Lone Star chapter of the Sierra Club, Dr. Cyrus Reed.
Woo, I found my thrills. I'm here to be the moderator. And in typical moderator fashion, I have not met with any of the panelists. I created a Google Doc with lots of questions, which I think probably they haven't read. Luke, can you give me a reminder? This is being Facebooked live. Is that true? Okay, so you lobbyist folks who work at the Capitol, you should be honest, but maybe not too honest as you answer your questions, because this will get back to the wider audience. So I'll try to be gentle. And I don't know, should I just, should I sit here and hand the microphone? Is that the best thing to do? Or can people see everyone here? Okay. So I'm not going to do big biographies. I'll ask one question, a gotcha question to each of you, and then we'll go to the actual panel questions. So, Audubon, Texas, Lisa. I know the Travis County folks. My daughter did a Girl Scout project on purple martins, so I met those really passionate folks about purple martins. So you're all about birds and the 100 million Americans who bird every year. Is that about right? And we heard earlier, wind can kill birds and bats. So why the heck does Audubon, why are you sort of a supporter of clean energy despite all that?
That is a good starter question. Thank you, Cyrus. Hello, everybody. Good to see you. My name is Lisa Gonzalez. I'm the executive director for Audubon, Texas, and we're the state office for the National Audubon Society. So, Cyrus, as your question hints at, organizations like Audubon are in a much different place on clean energy issues now than we were 20, 25 years ago when we were first talking about wind in the state of Texas. And the reason that we're here talking about clean energy today relates directly to our mission as an organization around protecting birds and the places that they need. And what the science is telling us is that bird populations are in decline. Anyone who's seen the State of the Birds report or any of the science that comes out of Audubon, Cornell Lab of Ornithology, other organizations that work on bird conservation issues understands that just about every type of or group of bird species in North America is in decline, with the exception of waterfowl and some water birds because of the large amount of work that has been put into the management and restoration of habitats for those particular species. Grassland birds, shore birds, arid land birds, all in decline. 3 billion birds lost since 1970. And that's 1 in 4 birds in my lifetime that are now gone. And the two biggest drivers of those losses are habitat loss and climate change. So if we want to work on those issues and bend the bird curve, as we like to say at Audubon, and that's halting and reversing the decline of bird species, we have to be out here at the forefront of working on energy, water, and conservation issues in the state of Texas. And we do that using the science, we do that in a nonpartisan way, and we do that working with partners that include partners in the conservation space and partners in the industry space. It's no longer about stopping clean energy in the state. It's about building better projects in ways that deliver the grid that we need as humans for all the reasons that we heard from Michael earlier, but also in ways that protect birds in their habitats.
Great answer. These are my gotcha questions. Judd, were you jealous last week when the God Squad met in Washington, D.C. and decided it's okay to drill in the Gulf and ignore the Endangered Species Act? Would you kind of like that for the large wind industry? Is that something you'd like?
I think she got an easier question than I did. That's what I think. I don't even know what the answer would be.
I hope it's no. I think it's no comment.
No, I was not jealous that I wasn't there. Obviously, it's riddled with hypocrisy, like many of the energy policies at the federal level are right now. These are complex problems. They deserve thoughtful solutions, and I'm not sure that we're always getting them. I'm one of the reasons I'm here today, and there are some people in this room that usually on Tuesdays at this time we're on a call together because we're trying to figure things out literally year round, is because I think as a voice for the industry and alongside some of our other partners and our corporate members, it's incumbent upon us to be thoughtful about how we arrive at these solutions. And part of that means commercial opportunities and building more wind and solar and battery farms all across our state. Part of it is making sure that we do a good job in the communities or in the areas where we're developing these projects. I don't have an answer for you, but I do think that in Texas, with the exception of a few, we do have a community who's pretty serious about coming up with measured solutions. But no, I wasn't.
And you do comply with the Endangered Species Act. That's my point. The wind industry does have to comply with it.
We do. There are extensive federal and state reviews on all of our projects. Most of those reviews have been completely shut down by the current administration. There's a lot has been made, for example, over the last year or so as it pertains to the loss of tax credits. I zig to most people zag on the tax credit issue. I think because of some of the reasons that Dr. Weber talks about, we're going to continue building these projects. This is not a nascent industry anymore. The benefits from a climate perspective, but also a cost perspective, which is what the off-taker is most interested in, speak for themselves. Where we're really seeing some pain right now is, for example, to build a wind farm in the United States, you have to get approvals from the Federal Aviation Administration. Any structure over 200 feet does. And so at first they were making sure that all of those went up to the director level. And now they're just not taking a look at any of them. So their way of shutting things down is to make sure that the extensive federal review that we are required to go through, they're not even passing it across anyone's desk right now. So anyways, I'm not sure I answered the question directly, but it's a hard time for the industry. I do think that there are complex problems out there. I think that probably by virtue of you being here today, you recognize that like we need more clean energy, but you want to protect your lands and your watersheds, and you're serious about that. And I hope to convince the 70 or so members of APA to be serious about it too, because the way that we survive is to do a better job in our local communities. And one way that we can do that is through state policy and being the good partners for 20 or 30 years that we're out there telling everybody we'll be.
I might skip the gotcha question so we can get into the policy.
You got me last time.
Yeah.
Mark gets off easy.
Mark gets off easy, and he's nervous. He'd be nervous to answer my. Yeah. Plus, he was in. I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and I believe he was at Syracuse for a time too. So I'm going to give him an orange crush. Let's talk about policy before we get to some of the conflicts. What are we doing right on state policy? What have we already done to ensure that we're developing? And I'm going to throw batteries in there as well. Wind, solar, and storage in a way that is already protective of special places. What are we doing right already? And I'll start with you, Mark. Maybe you can talk about last session, what we did.
Yeah, thank you, Cyrus. And he did get me with a gotcha last session. We were doing a early session panel discussion in the Capitol. We had about 100 people in the room, a lot of Capitol staffers, and we were talking about our legislative agenda, and we got to Q&A, and I saw Cyrus with his hand up, and I thought, don't go to Cyrus. But he was the only one with his hand up, and he decided to ask us about a battery storage fire. So, that was a lot of fun. He was testing our messaging, and of course, Will McAdams, and I nailed it, so it was fine, but I'm familiar with your work. So before I answer that question, I do want to thank Environment Texas for the invitation. Y'all have a great advocate in Luke. I've worked with Luke, and I know Judd has for a long period of time. I could say the same of Cyrus. You have a very, well-respected, disciplined, well-liked advocate in the Capitol. We don't always, I see, I'm not talking about you, Cyrus, I'm talking about Luke, but we work closely with these organizations. It's a pleasure to be here today. And, look, we don't always agree on strategy or messaging, but we do, as Judd mentioned, communicate often and try to collaborate as much as possible to craft sound policy solutions for the grid and ultimately for the consumer. So, to answer your question, Cyrus, kind of what have we done right in terms of enabling the growth of wind, solar, and energy storage? We operate a competitive energy-only market in Texas. I think number one, and it is a goal of our association, to preserve that framework. I think that is best for the consumer. Ultimately, I think you all know solar, and I don't do wind anymore. I did for many, many years, but I still like to talk about wind and defend it. I don't, want to step on Judd's toes, but when we talk clean energy, we're talking wind, we're talking solar, and we're talking battery storage. And so the competitive market structure in Texas has allowed these resources to grow tremendously. Solar and storage, particularly over the past 5 years. Last year alone, we added about 6,000 megawatts of solar and 6,000 megawatts of energy storage to the grid. What has that done? That has increased grid reliability, and it has driven down power prices. And you can kind of look at that on two fronts: retail power prices, which we hear a whole lot about, and then the wholesale power prices. Clean energy in Texas saves consumers about $900 million a month in wholesale power prices. If you look at retail prices, Texas is performing well. We're below the national average. All power prices are increasing throughout the nation. Texas power prices are increasing slower than the national average. That is because of wind and solar and energy storage. Clearly, in the early days of development, and much of this was led by wind. So I came down to Texas in 2005 from Washington, D.C., just after the RPS was adopted, worked on CREZ a little bit while that was moving forward. Both the RPS and CREZ, I think, were really the foundation that set this industry up for success. But now we don't have any clean energy, kind of pro-growth policy in Texas. We were in the Chapter 312, Chapter 313 tax abatement programs for quite some time. Technically, we're still in 312. I don't know how many people are getting 312s these days. We were removed from the 313 program a few sessions ago. I think you're all well aware of what has happened at the federal level in the tax credit space, but with tax credits, without tax credits, these are still the cheapest technologies. They can be deployed quickly at any scale. Solar and batteries in particular, you can build them in any county in Texas. And we at TSSA represent kind of every solar and battery technology you can imagine, from residential up to the utility scale. I think in terms of the regulatory space, I think we all know it's a fairly light touch in Texas. That has also contributed to growth. We do not have an agency in Texas that has an up or down vote on any power project. There are multiple reviews that do take place, as Judd mentioned, federal level, state level, a lot of voluntary mitigation efforts and conversations with environmental organizations. But I think too, and I'll wrap it up with this, you kind of have to think about why people in the clean energy industry are in the industry. We're all in it because we share your goals. We're trying to improve the planet's health. We are trying to deal with carbon emissions. And so we are committed to the same things you're committed to doing. And a lot of our members, I think, over the years have really kind of embraced tackling community projects outside of direct project impacts, conservation programs, environmental programs, providing funding to these types of things when they develop a new power project in the community. So I think we still have a good landscape. Obviously, session's coming up a lot faster than I would like.
There were bills passed last session that improved policy and safety and mitigation of harm to land.
Yeah. So quick, and then I'll pass the mic. But we focused with APA on two priority bills at the grid scale battery storage level. So we passed a decommissioning bill, which ensures that the only party responsible for decommissioning or removing a project at the end of its useful life is the project owner, not the landowner, not the community, not the state. You have to set aside funding for decommissioning. The bill is quite prescriptive. I think it's probably the strongest decommissioning law in the land, and it models wind decommissioning policy we did in 2017, so solar decommissioning we did in 2019, and then the other issue we tackled was fire safety. And kind of the real short version, because that's a fairly long technical bill, but we want to ensure in Texas, no matter the location, that every single battery storage project is following the most recent and strongest fire safety standards. I think that bill, unfortunately, has not really spread in terms of communicating down at the project level, the community level. We still see a lot of pushback on fire safety and decommissioning in project development activities. So we're working on it. I know Judd's working on it too. We're trying to get the word out better that we took really responsible measures that will allow the responsible growth of these technologies.
So just to compare, oil and gas, which obviously is important to our economy as well, also has some reclamation standards, and they are supposed to clean up wells, and yet we have, I can't remember how many thousands of orphaned wells and abandoned wells. Is there the potential that we'll have those problems with wind, solar, and batteries, that we'll have leftover dangerous equipment that can hurt our conservation efforts? Or are we pretty confident that we have the policies in place to make sure you don't do what oil and gas has done to us, where they're paying bonding levels that are 40 years old and don't cover the cost of cleaning up their mess? And I'm on Facebook Live, and I don't mind saying that.
Yeah, I if you don't mind. Mark and I both testified in Energy Resources in the House to kick off last session. Last session. I believe Chairwoman Craddock at that time said that it cost something like $60,000 or $70,000 to decommission an orphaned well. I think the current standard is that the companies who do this work put up a bond of $250,000 to cover 100 wells. And so the standard is quite different.
What do you have to do?
What we do is, and as Mark said, these have been around for a number of years now. I would say well over 95% probably of all the solar in Texas, if not more, has a decommissioning agreement. Wind's a little different because decommissioning came later, but when contracts are renewed, people are getting these decommissioning agreements established. But basically, you're responsible for land restoration and facility breakdown. And as of the most recent legislative session, you have to recycle any component of your facility that's capable of being recycled. I'm sure that everyone here has seen stories. Texas Monthly and others have done stories about a number of blades that have been left in Sweetwater, Texas. Stan Lambert, who's a retiring member from that part of the state, carried the recycling legislation, which makes sure that we are required to recycle those components, and we put up the financial assurance to be able to cover that cost. He also filed a bill to make sure that what happened in Sweetwater, which was basically a recycler taking something like $30 or $40 million, I think, and then leaving the country. He made sure that that doesn't happen again. So recyclers of clean energy components have to put up that financial assurance too. I would mention, though, that still wind, solar, and battery storage are the only energy production or generation technologies that must do this. There are, of course, national standard or federal standards for breakdown of a nuclear facility, but these type of standards don't exist for other types of energy generation. And I was not working for the industry when the first two passed, but Mark was, and all of those bills came with broad industry support, working with members of the legislature. In some cases, one that I can think of right now, but I won't mention, are complete opponents of our industry on a daily basis. And it was a good example, I think, of, again, complex issues, measured, thoughtful solutions that bring people together who are often on different pages.
Just going to add one more quick note. We do talk a lot about decommissioning, but what is more likely to happen at every project is repowering. And you're starting to see that in the wind industry now. So, the wind industry in Texas was kind of born in the late 90s, early 2000s. A lot of those projects didn't have the life cycle that today's technologies do. So you're seeing repowering. And kind of the short version is you're installing a new power project within the existing footprint. So say a solar project 25 years from now is at the end of its useful life, you will have more efficient technology. And so it's a great opportunity to just kind of have a reset button for everybody. The landowner gets a new lease agreement, community gets a new tax revenue stream, and within that existing project footprint, you're going to get more efficient power, you're going to get more power output from that existing footprint, again, because of improvements in technology. And there's a lot going on in the solar space right now to improve technology. And just like one little note here is, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was about 10 acres a megawatt roughly for solar. We're down to about 5 acres a megawatt of solar right now, and that is because of improvements to technology.
And I would just add, and then we need to let Lisa talk because she's an actual subject matter expert, and Mark and I are lobbyists. Dr. Weber brought up no, it was not Dr. Weber, it was Mr. Sansom, was that his name? Brought up eminent domain. I do think it's important in all of these discussions to recognize that none of our facilities or the people who develop them, the entities who develop them, have condemnation power. There is no eminent domain that they can exert. So if we can't come up with, say, an amount of financial assurance in a decommissioning agreement with a solar farm that's being built, and we can't come up with a number with that landowner who by state statute it says they can charge us whatever they want, we don't get to build the project. There's no eminent domain, there's no condemnation. I think part of the reason that our industry has been successful in kind of like coming to the legislature and saying, let's get ahead of this, let's solve this issue, is because we are totally dependent on our landowner partners to build and operate our facilities in the long term. Whereas, and I think we all have excellent relationships with our friends at TDUs, or in my prior gig, the oil and gas and pipeline industry. But there is a level when they're having a discussion with a landowner that they know they can win. And we're totally dependent on making sure that that landowner feels heard and that we have delivered a product to them that they can feel proud of in the long term.
So let's move on from last session and talk about potential other win-wins. We just basically what you said is all wind and solar is on private land. We heard Andy Sansom talk about conservation easements, fragmentation. Are there potential policies for win-win where we can continue to develop wind and solar, but also preserve lands or preserve farmlands? Or I don't know if Lisa can start there. What are some of those wins, whether it's voluntary or some sort of state law that we can do to continue to and I want to say what Luke said because I didn't get to ask the question, but you don't use water, you're not producing emissions. That's important to state up front. That's really important for the environment. But what are some of those policies that we could look at, either voluntary or through some kind of state statute, about land preservation and keeping farms together, stuff like that?
I'll start it and then pass the mic along. So Andy said something earlier, I think that's a good starting point for this. He mentioned the loss of farms and working lands in Texas. So Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute estimates we're losing 1,000 acres of working lands a day in Texas. And there is a generational transfer of private and working lands happening in the state right now. Lots of families are making decisions about whether or not they're going to be able to pass their farms and ranches on to the next generation. I also mentioned that with birds being in decline, grassland birds, 43% decline in those populations. We are not doing anything for grassland birds in the state of Texas unless we are working with private landowners, because Texas grasslands are privately owned. So part of, I think, the win-win that we need to focus on in the next legislative session is how we can continue to support private ranchers and landowners with revenue sources to allow them to keep their working lands working and to work with conservation organizations and land trusts, whether that's through conservation easements or whether it's through working with an organization like Audubon, through an Audubon, our conservation ranching certification program and others. There are lots of ways to support farmers and ranchers, and we need to make sure that we do that. At the same time, I think some of the opposition that we're seeing in the community and private landowner space is because There are people who feel that they're not part of the decision process, and they may feel that projects are coming into their communities or next door, and they're not hearing about it until they feel it's too late in the process. So I think any policies that we can work on that help to promote the sharing of information and transparency in those siting processes is also something that's going to benefit the industry as a whole, but then also benefit those communities and those private landowners. The third point, and then I'll pass the mic on, is I think when it comes to siting, we tend to focus a lot on where we don't want projects instead of focusing on those places where wind and solar and transmission development is okay. So we find ourselves in those NIMBY arguments quite a bit across the state. So what are those policy instruments that we can create that incentivizes development of a clean grid and the transmission that's required, but the siting of those projects in locations that aren't sitting on top of sensitive habitats, pristine grasslands, prairies, all of those things that we want to save. We need to figure out what those policy triggers are to incentivize projects in the places that are okay, and perhaps, you know, I don't want to say more difficult, but make it more stringent in terms of those places, developing projects in those places that are really sensitive. So guiding those projects to where we want them.
Yeah, go, keep responding.
Yeah, I'd have to say +1 to everything Lisa said. I don't have any. I don't think anybody who's reasonable about coming up with solutions has any issue with any of that. I'll add to it. I'll say that, and one way that I think about the last point she made is kind of a higher level of scrutiny.
Yes.
You know, this idea that we know that we have great biologists at Texas Parks and Wildlife who can help us with things. I imagine there are plenty of you in this room who work with them. There are some areas of the state where we're not going to tell, I don't believe, and I shouldn't say we, I don't believe the legislature is going to tell a private landowner you can't develop an energy project on your land. But to the extent that you're going to do it, we should be thoughtful about the grassland impacts or the runoff impacts that an industrial facility might have, something like that. So I think of it as a higher level of scrutiny, and that's something that we've certainly had a lot of discussions about. The other point I would make is that you're talking about 3 very different technologies when it comes to wind, solar, and storage, and they have very different land profiles as well. And because of that, I think we need to be careful about, and this comes up every time you have any public policy discussion about any issues, but we need to recognize that this is not a one-size-fits-all type of issue. The land profile of a storage facility, for example, is quite small. The land profile of a wind and solar facility are both quite large, but in one case, the way that they use the land that they're on is or in either case, it's very different, right? A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to go up to the top of a wind turbine outside of Sweetwater, and there were literally cattle grazing right below us while we were there. And that gets to that generational farm and ranch aspect. Yeah, oh, absolutely. You can grow crops right up to the base. So very, very, very different land profiles, and we need to be thoughtful about that. And then there are different facilities, and we need to think of them differently from what we're trying to solve, right? I think the question in any public policy discussion is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? So I'll use an example of wind. I bet there are people in this room who care deeply about dark skies and preserving those across our state. I took a bill the last 2 sessions to the legislature and said, we can turn those lights off as long as there's no planes or helicopters within 5 miles, at which point the radar would kick on and protect our pilots. I don't know why we can't get it passed, but we're going to try again. That's an issue where the industry, and for scale, that cost about $1 million a wind farm. It is not a cheap exercise. But I'm telling you, every one of our companies who develops wind is eager to take this conversation off the table in these communities because they have seen that people care deeply about it. That issue doesn't exist at a solar farm is what I'm trying to say. And so as we move through this, we need to be thoughtful and considerate that the facilities are different from a technology standpoint and a land use standpoint, and that it doesn't make it untenable. It doesn't make it impossible. It just means that we need to be careful not to have a one size fits all. I don't know anything about this, but I would imagine that the bird impacts of a solar and wind facility are quite different. We just need to be thoughtful about that. And so +1 to everything that Lisa said, and then yeah, I just wanted to add the difference in the technology because I think it matters.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a little bit of color on land use and development activities and transparency, and completely agree with Lisa and Judd. So +1 as well. And I think, Judd, you took an elevator to the top of that wind turbine, did you not?
It was a climb assist.
Okay.
Elevator is a
Okay. I just wanted to be clear. I climbed a 300-foot ladder, but, that's neither here nor there. Yeah, I'm jealous of your thick beard. I can't grow that, John, so I got to do something. So on land use, and we get a lot of this. I mean, as I think you all know, a lot of mis and disinformation pushed around on clean energy technologies. Recently heard, in fact, that one of the great NIMBY anti-best agitators is telling everyone across the state you need to wear a hazmat suit at a battery storage project. I was at a battery storage project last week, and that was news to the operators of the battery storage project as they were opening the doors and we were looking inside at the cells. So we deal with that stuff all the time. So to Judd's point, we need to have thoughtful, data-driven, fact-based conversations. So around land use, though, we now have about 37,000 megawatts of solar in ERCOT. The land required for 37,000 megawatts of solar is 0.2% of Texas land. Not 1%, not 0.5%, not 2%, 0.2%. And if you look at working lands, to Lisa's point, which is an important part of the conversation, that number goes up a little bit, but it's like 0.24, 0.25. Most of Texas is working lands by definition. So just wanted to put that into context. We still have tremendous room to grow for the solar space to continue to contribute to reliability and drive affordability in Texas without using a lot of land. I think you guys are all aware of the agrivoltaics movement in the solar space right now. A lot of our members are.
Tell us what that is.
Yeah, okay, so quick version, agrivoltaics is using a solar facility for more than one purpose. So pollinator habitat, solar grazing, a lot of solar grazing occurring in Texas right now, which is good for the environment, good for project costs. It allows, and we've seen rapid growth in in the solar grazing space. Guys who just overnight thought, well, I have sheep, I could probably run these around a solar farm. They can get to every nook and cranny of a solar facility. Mowers can shed rocks and chip panels. So there are a lot of benefits to solar grazing. You're seeing improvements in and these are, real microclimate benefits, but you can have improved airflow in a solar project, more moisture retention in the soil, lower temperatures at the project itself. These are all beneficial. You've got shade-grown crop activity going on right now. So there's a lot that's happening in the agrivoltaic space. And the point of that is, what we hear often is that solar's just paving over Texas. We're taking all the land. We're not going to do anything with it. You're just turning these into parking lots. Not true. There are many things that you can do with land when you have a solar project. And as Judd mentioned earlier, these are projects built on private land. These are agreements between private property owners and the companies. The landowners have full control. In my prior job, I was at the development company, and I saw how these conversations took place. If I'm a solar company and I want to develop on your land, I'll approach you. And if you say, I have zero interest, I'm moving on. Or say you have 10,000 acres, you may say, okay, I'm going to give you 3,000 or 4,000 over here, but I don't want you to touch this particular area of my land. These are the types of conversations that take place. And the landowner does have a lot of control. As Judd said, we don't have eminent domain authority. But on the development front, and I do agree with Lisa, I think if you look back to last session, a good starting point perhaps for this conversation going into next session is Bill Chairman Darby introduced about halfway through session on these issues. Thought it was a fairly thoughtful approach. But on the development front, a lot of people say, well, we learned about this project later. Why didn't we know about this earlier? It's a very tricky game, developing power projects. It is a hyper-competitive space. Every one of my members, Judd's members, are competing against each other for landowner agreements, for power purchase agreements, for site control. And so, folks are trying to be pretty careful in the early stages of power project development. They engage with the landowners. They may engage with some non-participating landowners in the area. And then at the right time, after they've made some progress on, say, ERCOT studies, power purchase agreements, site control, then they're willing to go more public with the project. The other thing, outside of the competition is that if you get out public too early, you're just going to feed the NIMBY movement. They're going to catch wind of that project. They're going to swarm. And that could derail projects. So you have to be a little bit careful with the transparency conversation. Fully agree that we need more, but what that looks like, and as Judd said, this is all project specific. It's a conversation that does require thought, but generally speaking, we're willing to have more conversations around transparency.
I think Lisa, you have one more thing to say.
Yeah, I just two things to add on to what you just said, Mark. I think what you just highlighted is why it's so important that organizations like those that are represented in the room and that are sitting up here are having these conversations, because as a conservation organization, we don't understand necessarily that development timeline. But if we have these conversations early, perhaps we can find those points in the process where it begins to, where some solutions begin to emerge on the timing of, disclosure and transparency processes and things like that. But developing those solutions together, I think is a good path forward. There are kind of 4 key actions that we think of that we would, when we're thinking of the policy space, around renewables, clean energy. The first is avoiding impacts when we can. That comes to responsible siting. The second is minimizing impacts where we can. Judd, you used the great example of lighting during migration, being able to bring down lights, being able to stop the movement of wind turbines, using radar now for those birders in the room. Birdcast. We have great radar data that tell us when birds are on the wing and moving during migration season, being able to apply those types of data to operations.
Do we have the wind farm, or we already have that radar?
On a large scale, we have that radar, but my understanding, it does need to be at the scale of the farm and the project, and that there are technologies now that are being used. For the times when we can't fully avoid impacts, and when minimization still does lead to some impacts, we need to monitor to understand what those impacts are, and then we need to be able to mitigate. And that's investing in conservation and restoration, nesting areas, breeding areas, those prime habitat areas to offset impacts. So avoid, minimize, monitor, mitigate. 4 simple actions.
Before I go to the next topic, I want to go back to your last one, mitigation. Is it, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been thinking about it actually with flooding and conserving land, right? If we conserve land in the right place, we can avoid flooding, but we can also help nature. And I imagine because wind and solar are developing on this private land, often in rural areas, is it typical for solar and wind developers to have a community benefits agreements, or make sure that some part of the land is preserved to avoid those impacts? Like what normally happens? Is that something that should be legislated, or we should leave it up to the landowner and the company to figure that out? I'm just thinking, how do we get this win-win where we're developing land where it makes sense, but conserving land where it doesn't, and maybe even putting in some money to do more conservation easements, do more of that that'll have multiple benefits. So big, long question, and you may not even remember what I said. I don't remember what I said.
Well, I mean, you guys can take a stab if you'd like. I would start by saying you're going to have two development companies here this afternoon that are going to, I think, touch on some of that. I know Orsted will be here for sure, and they're going to talk a little bit about a project, or I would imagine they're going to talk about a project in Northeast Texas where they worked on a conservation easement with the Nature Conservancy. And then Apex is going to be here, Mark's former company, and I don't know what they're going to talk about, but they have great examples on work that they've done on both bird and bat work over the years, I believe in like South Texas. So I don't know that that's the examples that those two companies will use, but write them down, ask a question if they touch on something else. So I think the easiest way to do it is to punt it to them, because they're going to have a couple developers here who are doing the work. And I think what you'll hear is a story about communities, especially in the Northeast Texas example, which I'm more familiar with, communities who put a little pressure on and said, this is really important stuff to us. How can we make this work together? And it's a pretty successful example working with another, I think, thoughtful group in this space in the Nature Conservancy.
So it wasn't legislated, it happened through those conversations?
In those cases, yes.
And I won't steal my former company's thunder. I know Laura will talk about this stuff, but this too is also a little bit complex. So when I was at Apex, we unveiled a program. And I guess the first thing I would say is we want to be good neighbors. I mean, it is in our business interest. It is in the community's interest. We want to have a presence. We don't want to just set up shop and scoot out of town. We like to be a part of, or I should say the industry. I don't work for Apex anymore, but industry wants to be part of the community. But when you talk about things like community benefit funds, even payments to non-participating landowners, it doesn't always work out how you would think. When Apex unveiled this program on community benefit funds in other states, but then non-participating revenue or revenue for non-participating landowners, we had a lot of landowners who just said, no, I'm not interested. You're not buying me off. I don't care. You know, we're like trying to do the right thing and say, hey, we understand you may not want to look at this particular project. You know, there are going to be community benefits in terms of new tax revenue for schools, infrastructure, services, et cetera. So you will directly benefit. You're going to get lower power prices, but we're happy to provide compensation, not quite the same as a lease agreement for the technology, but a lot of people just said, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to look at it. I don't want your money. So sometimes we try to do the right thing and we're unable to.
Luke, I don't know when we're supposed to end. How much time do we have?
You got like 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes. Okay. Let's go to what we're thinking about next session, how we're feeling. So last legislative session, I think many people in this room were involved and know it was a difficult fight. There were some bills that would have really been detrimental to the development of clean energy that passed the Senate, and we were, for the most part, able to stop in the House. So my first question is, last week or a week or two ago, the interim charges came out. What were your reactions to those interim charges? Did they make you more hopeful, less hopeful? Just how did you feel about the interim charges and what they're looking at? And maybe you can, if you want to mention any of them, you can. But there were some specific to renewable energy and transmission.
Yeah, so I often think it could have been worse. But no, I think that throughout the interim charges in both chambers, it's clear that you've got a bunch of members who are thinking about energy needs right now. There are data center charges up and down in a number of committees, but kind of a through line that you also saw is this interest that the legislature has in ensuring that none of our foreign adversaries are having an impact on infrastructure in our daily life. And maybe Mark can talk on that because he was up representing the industry very well in a hearing on that topic last week, I guess. Feels like 100 days ago. On issues that are specific to renewable energy, Senate Natural Resources is going to cover kind of decommissioning and end of life cycle issues. It's an interesting charge in the sense that we had this charge last interim, and TCEQ, in collaboration with the Bureau of Economic Geology at UT Austin, actually, or maybe the UT system, either way, they did an extensive report on this topic, and so I'm not exactly sure what the Senate is looking to get out of that charge.
Was passed.
And legislation was passed, some that we've already spoken about, but kind of the through line of that extensive report was that the researchers at UT, in collaboration with TCEQ, felt that there was a robust regulatory environment around life cycle issues. So they're going to study that again. I'll be honest, like, I'm a little worried that it's a charge that's designed to go after us in some way. But certainly I think we've proven that we're willing to be good actors in that space and willing to support solutions insofar that they make sense. Cyrus mentioned that we've had some really tough battles in the last couple of sessions. I don't expect those to go away. We have a very motivated and very wealthy group of individuals, quite small. I'm talking 2 to 4 individuals who are really solely funding a legislative effort to impose permitting restrictions on wind and solar that would not exist for a natural gas plant, for example. I think, as we've discussed here today, we're willing to have a discussion around siting requirements, even if those only extend to wind, solar, and storage. We wouldn't like it, but we're willing to engage in that discussion where, as an industry, we've had to draw a line, and I can't speak for Mark, but we at APA will continue to draw a line, and I'm confident he'll be in the trenches with me, is this idea that you would create 2 classes of energy projects, and that one would be subject to an up or down vote by somebody in Austin, and that decision would impact somebody's ability to develop energy on their own property. So anyways, I'll let you guys weigh in on the interim charges. I did want to make that point about kind of the fight that we've been in the last couple of sessions. And because I have the microphone and get to do this, I'm going to ask Lindsay to just wave your hand. We brought on Lindsay, who we found through Patricia, a little while, I guess, over the last several years, to help us organize advocates from all across the state. And what you saw is over 100 people showed up at a Senate Business and Commerce hearing. This is a committee where they are not accustomed to that much public testimony on a regular basis.
5 people.
Yeah, it's a lot of times on energy, the same group of us. Lindsay found 100 people, from students interested in climate change from the University of Houston, which I think Luke helped with, all the way to landowners from the Panhandle of Texas who had developed wind on their ranch, their family ranch. These are dyed-in-the-wool conservatives, and they just want to be able to build an energy project on their land. And if they need to do something a little bit different to make sure the outcomes are better, they're willing to have that discussion, because they're more interested in the long-term viability of their ranch than anybody else, I can assure you. But I thought it was neat that we had Lindsay on board to rally those people together and show that there is a diverse cross-section of people all across our state who are interested in conservation outcomes and climate outcomes and making sure that we develop more energy. But the idea that you would create 2 classes of facilities, a different standard for one than another, for really only 2 reasons. One, politically, we're kind of in this herd mentality of, Republican, oil and gas, Democrat, wind and solar. First of all, that's not true. We've got a ton of champions on both sides of the aisle in Austin. But second of all, it's not helpful to any of the discussions we're happening today. And then the other factor that we have is this very small group of wealthy individuals. And what it comes down to is they don't want to look at something. And I worked for a member of the legislature from East Texas for a long time, and we would have folks call us and say, my neighbor is working with, Pilgrim to put in a chicken farm or a chicken house next door, and I don't like the way that it looks or smells. And while I'm sensitive to that, we live in a public property rights state. And so I believe it was our first speaker again, he said, we don't want to get, I'm paraphrasing, we don't want to get in the way of that private property rights, but we do need to be sensitive that there are times where there can be impacts to our neighboring landowners or whoever it may be. That's the approach that we would like to take. That's the discussion we would like to take.
Especially with all the water that wind and solar are using.
Yeah. It's this idea that we're not going to take someone's right away, but we are willing to have a discussion about how we mitigate those impacts in the long term.
I'll speak generally. I think going into this next legislative session, we'll definitely be on the lookout for those bills, similarly that we saw in the last session, such as Senate Bill 819, which was the bill that sought to create a really rigid permitting structure for clean energy. We'll be looking for bills that strike that balance, that don't seek to kill the clean energy industry because it is a climate solution in the state, but also looking to support language that provides those protections for habitats and communities that we've spoken about earlier. I think the other thing that we'll be on the lookout for this session that we saw some of last session is the use of misinformation. So we had some instances last session where some of the messaging of conservation organizations such as Audubon was co-opted on issues such as bird collisions, to use those issues as a barrier to clean energy. Bird collisions are a part of the conversation that needs to happen, but it also needs to be put in its proper context. Bird collisions are related to any type of infrastructure that we build. There are going to be collisions, and it is an issue that needs to be addressed. But if we're talking about bird collisions, we shouldn't be using that as a means to kill an important industry that's also a climate solution. We should be putting into the context of the broader bird collision discussion. Buildings, we have a Lights Out Texas program that is all about bird-friendly buildings.
Building-friendly codes.
That's right, turning lights out at night. Up to 1 billion birds die a year from building collisions. And in the clean energy space, the best estimates we have are somewhere between 140,000 and 700,000 birds a year. Still important, still an issue that needs to be addressed, but those numbers, those are orders of magnitude in difference, and so we need to understand the data, put it in its proper context, and just be sure that some of the messaging that we're using as conservation organizations aren't being co-opted in ways that are working against some of the issues that we're trying to advance.
Mark, the interim charges and next session.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about bird deaths, though, because according to DOI, the number one killer of birds in America are cats. We never see legislation to address cats. They must have a very powerful lobby. I'm not sure what's going on there, but the International Cat Lobby, that's right.
It's the third rail.
There you go. And as a dog lover, I'm happy to get after the cats. I'm allergic. We do not have good relationships. No, so interim charges. I think in my legislative affairs director, Bree Weber, is in the back of the room. I think we have 7 on the House side and 7 on the Senate side that touch our industry. I do not ever remember having that many interim charges. I did have the pleasure of testifying last week at BNC. I suspect both Judd and I will be testifying a lot this summer and into the fall. I think the anxiety is pretty high right now. I think things are starting to come into focus in terms of what we're going to see on the policy front. I think, unfortunately, we're going to have another market design discussion. Some of the discussion the other day at BNC after we tackled grid security was a little bit concerning. I think we're definitely looking at more market design.
The ERCOT grid, whatever, yesterday, and I think, solar was at 50 or 60% at 6 p.m. and then wind and batteries kicked on at 8.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, Pablo Vega's concerned about base power. We got base power right
Yeah,
there.
that's right. And, base load is a kind of loaded term. I don't really care for it, quite frankly. I think nuke is really the only base load we have that runs 99% of the time. Everything else is weather dependent and intermittent. And you heard Dr. Stewart with Idaho National Lab say solar plus storage on a co-located basis is baseload power, and that's true. Solar typically, vast majority of the year is a 12-hour resource, 8 to 8. You add batteries on the front end and the back end, you're suddenly getting to 16 hours of power output with long duration energy storage.
76% right now, Judd.
Yeah. And this is what we see frequently. We set record after record. My comms team is constantly harassing me. We need to tweet. We set another record. And I'm like, guys, this is just, it's really getting boring at this point. It's old. Let's not do that. What's that?
It's not that boring.
But also, our opponents have a tendency to just pat themselves on the back. I think they break their arms patting themselves on the back. We don't really do that in our space. We just perform. We continue to perform. But we do set records. In fact, I saw within the past month, new battery storage penetration record. 20% of the grid was powered by batteries in the late afternoon in March. We consistently see batteries powering 10 to 15% of the grid in the morning and the afternoon. So we want to see continued progress in solar and storage at my association, Wind with Judd. But we have a lot, and I think there'll be another conversation around permitting, siting. Not sure really what that's going to look like at this point. We'll have a lot of bills. I mean, every session we probably start out 120, 130 bills we're tracking, and then that kind of funnels down over time, and then you're dealing with maybe a dozen real bills that move during session. I suspect we'll see the same thing. You see a lot of bills that are just driven by mis and disinformation, and you look at them and you think, how did anybody actually take the time to put this down on paper? This is just completely nonsensical. So we got a lot of that stuff to do. And, our work is constant, as Judd said. It's not just the Capitol. There's a lot going on at ERCOT and protocol revisions. There's a lot happening at the PUC. We have a reliability review right now that is going to drive a lot of the conversation in the Capitol right now. So I haven't had I've never had a fun session. They've been worse since Winter Storm Uri, and I'm afraid this one's not going to be a picnic. We got a lot of work to do. We're going to build coalitions. We're going to work with folks like you. Last session, what you did see around the two biggest threats to our industry and to the grid and consumers, quite frankly, you saw the oil and gas industry stand up with the clean energy industry, the environmental community. Big tech was involved, manufacturers were involved. We all agreed that these were bad bills for Texas. Fortunately, we were able to kill them. I think we're going to need a whole lot more of that this coming session.
I believe we're at the end. Is there time for questions or no time for questions? No questions.
We did it.
Please do look at their websites, get involved. Sierra Club has a monthly legislative action committee. We have a meeting next week. We'll be talking about our legislative priorities. A lot of it will align with these folks. Not always, but mostly. So please get involved and get ready. There's going to be interim hearings and there's going to be a legislative session. So interim hearings are already starting. There's some more this week. So get involved. We need everybody to meet Lindsay to make Texas continue to be a great place. And as the Sierra Club lobbyist, I'm usually jealous when I go to the annual lobbyist meeting and, New York and California pass these big renewable standards. But then I look at what Judd just showed me on his phone. I'm like, we're already winning without that legislation. So let's keep it up.
Thank you all.